The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and expensive leather. The lights were dim, a muted glow bouncing off the polished oak table where deals worth billions were whispered into existence. Outside, the city throbbed with life, oblivious to the invisible hands rearranging its fate. In this world, intelligence was overrated. What mattered more was endurance, a ruthless persistence that could grind through failure, humiliation, and market collapse until fortune yielded its rewards. The winners were not always the sharpest minds, the most brilliant strategists, or the visionary geniuses the history books idolized. They were those who refused to quit when the world told them they had lost. They were the ones who understood that survival, more than insight, is the currency of power. Consider the story of Jesse Livermore, the boy wonder of Wall Street. He started with a nickel and a dream, running up his first stock market fortune while still a teenager. His rise was meteoric, but so was his fall. Livermore lost millions more than he ever made, yet he returned again and again, timing the market with uncanny precision. The Great Depression made heroes out of those who could endure its merciless swings. Livermore's story isn't about genius. It is about persistence in the face of crushing inevitability. His ability to rise after catastrophic losses, to confront the psychological weight of failure repeatedly, speaks to a principle seldom celebrated in textbooks. Success is more often forged in the fires of repetition and resilience than in flashes of brilliance. Across the Atlantic, during the same period, Europe was wrestling with its own financial nightmares. Banks collapsed, governments defaulted, and fortunes evaporated overnight. Yet in the shadows of these collapses, certain figures, often considered reckless or irrational at the time, quietly accumulated power. One such man was Sigmund Warburg, a German Jewish banker who had fled Nazi Germany, carrying little more than his knowledge of markets and an unbreakable determination to succeed. Warburg understood that opportunity was always cloaked in chaos. While others hesitated in fear of ruin, he pressed forward, exploiting patterns invisible to the timid. By the 1950s, he had become a titan, not because he was the smartest mind in finance, but because he refused to accept the constraints that history, politics, or conventional wisdom placed upon him. Persistence, more than intelligence, had made him invincible. Even in modern markets, the narrative is the same. Consider the rise of hedge fund legends, those whose names dominate financial headlines, yet whose stories reveal a common thread: obsession and relentlessness. Ray Dalio, for instance, built a fortune not through the sudden eureka moments popularized in Silicon Valley lore, but through systematic repetition, rigorous study of failures, and an almost compulsive devotion to process. Bridgewater Associates became a machine of persistence, capable of weathering crises that obliterated lesser firms. Dalio's strategy, like Livermore's and Warburg's before him, shows that markets are less about intelligence and isolation and more about disciplined engagement over decades. The smartest trader in the room is irrelevant if they cannot endure the relentless attrition of loss, emotion, and uncertainty. But persistence has a darker twin, a shadow side rarely acknowledged. The same quality that drives people to unbroken success can also anchor them to unethical behavior. The pursuit of wealth, untempered by conscience, breeds corruption. Look at the subprime mortgage collapse of 2008. The architects of the crisis, bankers, rating agencies, mortgage brokers, were often not stupid. They were tireless. They refined processes, created complex financial instruments, and exploited loopholes with relentless precision. Persistence, in their case, was weaponized, turning ingenuity into systemic risk. Theirs was a persistence divorced from morality, an unwavering commitment to financial survival and gain regardless of the human cost. When billions are at stake, the psychological edge comes not from intelligence, but from the willingness to persist in environments most people would flee. Psychology, in fact, is the hidden engine of every market triumph and catastrophe. Behavioral economists have long documented the biases that plague investors: overconfidence, loss aversion, herd mentality. Yet the persistent player learns to weaponize these biases, both in themselves and in others. They do not merely react, they anticipate, they endure, they exploit the predictable irrationality of the crowd. George Soros, the man who broke the Bank of England in 1992, did not do so by being smarter than every other trader. He did it because he was willing to stake everything on a hypothesis, to sit in discomfort while the world hesitated, and to double down where others flinched. The lesson hidden beneath the spectacle of profit is chilling markets reward the relentless, not necessarily the brilliant. The stories of persistence extend beyond individuals to institutions, to nations themselves. The Dutch East India Company, often romanticized as the first multinational corporation, thrived because it survived repeated disasters, shipwrecks, piracy, colonial resistance, and fluctuating markets. Its shareholders tolerated years of uncertainty, losses, and political turbulence because the company's leaders exhibited a rare combination of perseverance and strategic foresight. By the time the 17th century closed, the company had carved a global trade empire, dominating spice routes and maritime commerce. Its story is not one of genius alone, but of enduring, adapting, and persisting through challenges that would have destroyed less dog competitors. Persistence is also invisible in its most intimate form, the quiet, obsessive diligence that occurs behind closed doors. It is the mathematician poring over risk models at 3 a.m., the investor replaying decades of market crashes on spreadsheets, the entrepreneur waking before dawn to negotiate deals that will shape industries. These are not cinematic moments of brilliance. They are hours, days, years of unwavering effort, repeated over and over, often without recognition. Yet history has shown that those who endure, who persist when the world seems to have already judged them, are the ones who ultimately define the financial landscape. The world rewards the patient, the stubborn. The unyielding persistence, however, does not exist in a vacuum. It demands obsession and almost pathological attachment to process and outcome. Nikola Tesla, though not a financier, demonstrated a similar principle in the realm of invention. His failures were as dramatic as his successes, yet he returned tirelessly to the work that others abandoned. Financial history echoes the same pattern. The markets are littered with bright minds who gave up too soon, whose potential fortunes evaporated because they mistook early failure for final judgment. In finance, as in life, time is the great arbiter of skill and endurance. The ethical dilemmas of persistence are starkest when the pursuit of wealth collides with human cost. During the rise of industrial capitalism, financiers manipulated markets, crushed competitors, and exploited labor with surgical precision. J.P. Morgan, the man who orchestrated bailouts and reorganized bankrupt railroads, was as revered for his financial acumen as he was reviled for his monopolistic practices. He endured through crisis, negotiated with governments, and wielded influence with unflinching persistence. The question that haunts financial history is whether such persistence, when untethered from conscience, creates power or perpetuates systemic injustice. The answer, as the centuries have shown, is both. Even the psychology of the individual is molded by persistence. Studies of elite traders, entrepreneurs, and financiers reveal common traits: tolerance for uncertainty, emotional regulation under extreme stress, and an almost compulsive need to learn from failure. Persistence reshapes the brain, conditioning it to absorb shocks, to see opportunity where others perceive only risk. It is not genius that allows someone to bet against a collapsing currency or double down on a declining stock. It is the relentless rehearsal of endurance under pressure, the repetition of risk, and the comfort with discomfort that defines the truly successful. The narrative that intelligence alone drives wealth is comforting but misleading. History repeatedly demonstrates that fortunes are not solely the product of insight but of dogged perseverance. Warren Buffett, often cited as the embodiment of financial wisdom, built his empire as much through patience and long-term discipline as through analytical brilliance. He waited decades for opportunities, endured recessions, and consistently resisted the seductive temptations of short-term gain. His story reinforces a critical truth: the market is a relentless adversary, and only those who persist, who endure, who remain engaged despite failure, rise to dominate it. In the end, the world of money is a crucible. It strips away hubris, punishes impatience, and exposes the fragile ego of those who mistake intellect for invincibility. History's greatest financiers, investors, and industrialists share a trait less glamorous than genius, but infinitely more potent: the refusal to surrender. Whether in the chaos of the Great Depression, the collapse of financial empires, or the rise of modern hedge funds, persistence emerges as the invisible currency behind wealth. Those who endure are remembered, those who falter are forgotten, regardless of the brilliance they once possessed. And yet, as we peer into the modern labyrinth of global finance, the lesson is both timeless and terrifying. Persistence does not guarantee virtue, justice, or even ultimate survival. It can be weaponized, corrupted, and wielded in the service of greed and exploitation. The unyielding pursuit of wealth can create empires and wreck lives with equal efficiency. It is a force that demands respect, fear, and understanding, a reminder that the machinery of power runs not on genius alone, but on the ceaseless, grinding insistence of those who refuse to quit. Persistence is not celebrated in the newspapers or on financial television, which prefers sensational stories of brilliance and breakthrough. Yet in the quiet shadows, behind the headlines of billion-dollar deals and market upheavals, it is persistence that dictates outcomes. Markets reward the relentless, punish the hesitant, and immortalize those willing to endure the long, brutal game. Intelligence matters, yes, but only in service of endurance. Those who outlast the chaos, who navigate the storms of emotion, history, and risk with unwavering resolve, are the true masters of finance. They are the ones who, in the end, write the invisible laws that govern money, power, and survival itself. The air in trading floors and boardrooms is thick with tension, as if every dollar changing hands carries a whisper of destiny. Yet what we rarely see is the human cost behind the screens and spreadsheets, The sleepless nights, the frayed relationships, the moral compromises that persistence demands. Behind every financial triumph is a narrative of sacrifice, of obsession, and sometimes of ethical erosion. The persistent individual is not merely enduring markets, they are enduring themselves, wrestling with fear, greed, doubt, and the seductive intoxication of power. Take the saga of long-term capital management in the 1990s. The firm was staffed with some of the most brilliant minds in economics, including Nobel laureates. Their models were mathematically elegant, their predictions precise. But brilliance alone could not immunize them against the chaos of global markets. When Russia defaulted on its debt in 1998, LTCM faced collapse. The models that had brought them wealth failed, yet the partners did not immediately retreat. They persisted, attempting to navigate a storm that would have crushed anyone less dogged. Eventually, a bailout orchestrated by the Federal Reserve prevented systemic disaster, underscoring a chilling truth: persistence, even among the smartest, can flirt with catastrophe. In finance, endurance without humility is a double-edged sword. The psychology underpinning this endurance is complex. Human beings are wired to seek patterns, to find order in chaos, yet markets thrive on unpredictability. Persistent traders develop an almost pathological tolerance for uncertainty. They become comfortable standing at the edge of catastrophe, weighing the possibility of ruin against the potential of extraordinary reward. This tolerance is neither taught in classrooms nor captured in textbooks. It is on through experience, through repetition of high-stakes failure and recovery. George Soros described it as a reflexive process, a continuous loop of hypothesis, action, observation, and adjustment. Persistence is, in essence, a mental discipline, a hard-earned capacity to navigate fear and doubt with unwavering focus. Persistence is also intimately tied to timing, a fact the public rarely appreciates. The market does not reward intelligence or effort uniformly. It rewards endurance aligned with opportunity. Jesse Livermore's greatest successes were not merely the result of keen insight. They came because he persisted long enough, through multiple bankruptcies, to capitalize on historical moments others missed. Similarly, Warren Buffett's most significant investments, American Express during the salad oil scandal, Coca-Cola during recessionary pressure, were predicated on patience and the willingness to withstand skepticism and fear. In finance, persistence is a silent wager on time itself, the ultimate arbiter of who prospers and who perishes. Yet persistence is rarely noble. Its shadow is long, and in the pursuit of wealth, it often masks ruthlessness. The history of capitalism is littered with figures whose relentlessness trampled morality. John D. Rockefeller, whose Standard Oil empire dominated the late 19th century, was relentless in pursuit of market control. He endured attacks from competitors, lawsuits, and public outrage, never relinquishing an inch of strategic advantage. His persistence created unprecedented wealth, yet it also fostered monopolistic oppression, ethical compromise, and social resentment. The lesson is stark: the same quality that ensures financial survival can simultaneously enable exploitation. Endurance is neutral. Its consequences depend on the values of the wielder. Persistence is also tested by external forces, many beyond comprehension. Global finance is a network of interdependencies, where a single collapse can reverberate across continents. The Asian financial crisis of 1997 demonstrates this vividly. Countries that had pursued growth relentlessly, South Korea, Thailand, Indonesia, found that persistence in one arena could be annihilated by vulnerability in another. Investors and institutions that weathered initial turbulence often did so through sheer endurance and adaptability. Those who fled at the first tremor perished, their capitals evaporating in a matter of days. Survival in finance is rarely about foresight alone. It is about the stamina to endure shocks, to adapt, and to recalibrate endlessly under pressure. The allure of persistence also warps human perception of risk. In behavioral finance, this is known as the sunk cost fallacy, the tendency to continue investing time, energy, or money because of prior commitment, even when evidence suggests withdrawal. Yet in the world of high-stakes finance, the line between folly and genius is razor-thin. For some, persistence transforms perceived risk into opportunity. For others, it becomes an inexorable spiral toward ruin. The distinction is subtle, often invisible to outsiders, and defines the thin margin between legendary success and catastrophic failure. Ethically, the implications are profound. Consider the relentless drive behind predatory lending practices leading up to the 2008 financial collapse. Executives did not simply make mistakes, they persisted in creating and marketing loans that would fail, betting on human vulnerability for profit. Their persistence was disciplined, strategic, and devastatingly effective, demonstrating that endurance, absent moral anchoring, is a force capable of systemic destruction. Finance is not inherently corrupt, but it magnifies human tendencies, amplifying both virtue and vice. Persistence, in this context, is a lens revealing the character of the person wielding it. History repeatedly reinforces that persistence is not reserved for financiers alone. Governments, empires, and institutions demonstrate the same principle on a larger scale. The Marshall Plan, which rebuilt post-war Europe, was a testament to strategic endurance. American policymakers, facing skepticism and political resistance, persisted in executing a program that reshaped the global economy. The lesson is clear: whether wielded for profit, power, or policy, persistence is the engine that drives transformation. It is not brilliance alone that reshapes nations. It is sustained action in the face of uncertainty and opposition. Even at the personal level, the human brain responds uniquely to persistence. Neurological studies suggest that endurance through repeated stress and challenge strengthens prefrontal cortex activity, enhancing decision-making under uncertainty. Persistent individuals literally rewire themselves, becoming resilient not by choice but by repeated confrontation with adversity. This explains why some traders can face losses exceeding tens of millions without capitulating, while others crumble at minor setbacks. Persistence is both psychological armor and strategic weapon, honed through experience, reinforced by habit, and magnified by stakes that ordinary life rarely offers. In the modern era, persistence has taken on new dimensions. Algorithms and AI now dominate trading floors, executing strategies at speeds unimaginable decades ago. Yet even here, human persistence remains pivotal. It is human oversight, judgment, and adaptive endurance that determine whether technology is leveraged for profit or disaster. Quantitative models fail without the persistent hand guiding them, testing assumptions and recalibrating strategies in real time. Endurance is no longer merely about personal stamina. It is about the capacity to maintain vigilance, adaptability, and patience in an age of exponential technological acceleration. The persistence that drives wealth creation is therefore inseparable from risk, moral ambiguity, and psychological fortitude. It is a quality that defies glamorized notions of genius, revealing instead a quiet. Financial history is not written by those who conceive brilliant ideas once and abandon them. It is written by those who return, again and again, undeterred by failure, rejection, or disaster. Persistence is the thread connecting the trader who bets against the bank, the banker who rebuilds after exile, the entrepreneur who sacrifices decades of comfort, and the investor who survives multiple recessions to redefine wealth. It is endurance more than brilliance that dictates destiny. And yet the human cost is undeniable. Persistence demands obsession, isolation, and sacrifice. Relationships fray, health declines, and morality often bends under the weight of relentless ambition. The pursuit of wealth becomes a crucible in which character is tested, revealing both heroism and cruelty. Those who persist are not merely accumulating money, they are negotiating with their own psychology, contending with fear, desire, and ethical compromise. In this sense, the story of persistence is as much about human frailty as it is about financial triumph. The unvarnished truth is stark: the market does not reward morality, intelligence, or foresight alone. It rewards endurance. It favors those who can weather humiliation, loss, and uncertainty with unwavering focus. It elevates those who refuse to quit when conventional wisdom dictates surrender. The most celebrated financial successes, the titans of Wall Street, the architects of industrial empires, the hedge fund legends, share a trait invisible in public discourse: unrelenting persistence. They endure when others abandon the field. They capitalize on opportunities created by chaos, and they persist through crises that would annihilate lesser actors. In the end, persistence is the invisible force shaping the world of wealth, power, and influence. It is neither glamorous nor straightforward, and it carries with it both creation and destruction. The markets, and by extension the world, are a theater where endurance writes history more than brilliance, where doggedness often trumps insight, and where survival, and sometimes dominance, is won not by the smartest minds, but by the ones who refuse to surrender. We are now poised to go even deeper into modern capitalism's moral paradoxes, the psychological costs of extreme persistence, and historical case studies that illuminate how endurance has reshaped financial empires and destroyed lives in equal measure. The story of persistence in finance does not conclude with triumphs alone. It concludes with reflection on the invisible toll, the moral compromises, and the human fragility hidden behind ledgers and balance sheets. Look at the collapse of Lehman Brothers in 2008. For decades, the firm had endured market swings, regulatory pressures, and competitive threats through sheer persistence. Its leaders believed that endurance would always translate into survival. They were relentless, calculating, and fearless, yet even persistence has limits. The house of cards built on leverage, risk, and ambition ultimately crumbled, leaving a wake of devastation that reshaped global markets. In this moment, persistence was no longer a virtue. It had become hubris, a reminder that endurance alone cannot insulate against structural failure. This duality defines the pursuit of wealth. Persistence is a force of creation and destruction, a measure of human will, and a mirror reflecting our deepest obsessions. The same quality that propels visionaries to greatness can bind them to ruin. It is evident in the entrepreneur who sacrifices decades to build a company only to watch it fail, in the investor who bets everything on a thesis that collapses under unforeseen circumstances, and in the financial architect whose unwavering strategies inadvertently trigger crises. Yet the lesson remains: it is better to persist and risk failure than to possess intelligence without action, vision without endurance. In the world of money, fortune favors the dog, the stubborn, the unyielding. The persistent do not merely endure markets. They endure themselves. They endure fear, doubt, and temptation. They endure ethical ambiguity, public scrutiny, and the quiet knowing of regret. They persist because they understand that the game of finance is not won in a single brilliant stroke, but in the repetition of effort, the cultivation of resilience, and the willingness to confront failure again and again. Across centuries, across continents, and across industries, this principle remains unbroken. Those who persist, who refuse to abandon the field when it is easiest to do so, ultimately shape the contours of wealth, power, and history itself. And so the hidden truth of finance, the one overlooked by headlines, case studies, and popular mythology, is this: winners are rarely the smartest. They are the persistent. They endure when the world tells them to stop. They capitalize when others hesitate. And they survive crises that annihilate brilliance alone. History, markets, and human behavior converge on this simple, haunting insight: persistence is power, endurance is influence. To survive, to thrive, and to shape the world of money, you must refuse to quit. In the quiet, uncelebrated hours behind every empire, every market victory, and every financial legend, persistence whispers its undeniable truth. The relentless endure, the hesitant falter, and only those who refuse to surrender can claim the spoils of history. The markets are indifferent to intelligence. They are merciless to the impatient. And in this relentless theater of wealth, the greatest players are those who keep playing long after others have walked away. Persistence is the invisible force that writes the final lines of every financial story. And in the world of money, those lines are permanent.